Hello and welcome to another edition of Press Pass on GNAT TV. I'm Andrew McKeever, the news director here at GNAT TV's News Project. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. Today is Friday, February 23rd, and all of a sudden town meeting really is just around the corner. And we're fortunate to have with us today two veteran journalists, I guess would be the appropriate way to describe it. Here to help us understand what's going to be coming up at your town meetings. That'll be starting on, well, I guess in Manchester on Saturday, March 3rd will be the first one, and then continuing on through till the following Tuesday on March 6th, when many towns will be having Australian ballot voting or the traditional floor meeting. So with us today to help us unpack all of these things is Jim Therrien, who's a correspondent with the Bennington Banner and VT Digger, and Greg Sukiennik, the editor of the Manchester Journal. Gentlemen, great to have you here today, and
nice to be here.
Thank you for being with us.
It's great to be back.
Well, okay, town meeting, a lot going on, a lot to get to. Why don't we start off on the southern end of the county, Jim, with what's happening in Bennington? It sounds like there's going to be an interesting mayor question under discussion down there.
I did a survey of the questions out there in the county, and that was by far the number one most interesting and most impactful, probably. If it passes, especially, it'll make Bennington a mayoral format of government. We'll elect a mayor, I think, in about 1 year after that. There's an awful lot of opposition, especially among town officials, and quite a few people in town seem to be against it, but they're also a hardcore group of supporters. The familiar Mike Bethel, the great advocate of this issue, he's been involved a couple times. This is about the fourth time in the last 15 or so years that they voted on this, but this is the first time it's been a binding referendum developed by Bethel's lawyer, and it would make a charter amendment to the Bennington Charter calling for a mayor. The other votes were all non-binding referendums, just saying, do you want a mayor? This time it would be in there, and that's got a lot of people really out there in opposition. Everybody, it seems like, in town government, for sure. And it would replace the town manager. And at the same time, we've had a problem with the town manager admitting that he started a project of a salt shed last year without waiting for the final approval on the wetlands permit, which could possibly lead to a fine. We're not sure yet. So all of this is playing in, and the town manager, Stu Hurd, has been there 25 years, 26 years. So over that time, he's probably made some decisions that have gotten people upset, and a lot of this is playing together right now, and there's a lot of emotion about it. Facebook is pretty crazy, other social media, and it's all going to come to a head on the 6th. It's a ballot question.
Now, what exactly is the difference between a mayoral form of government and a town manager? I mean, aside from the fact that the mayor would be elected as opposed to appointed by the select board.
Well, that's the big thing, according to the supporters of this. They want someone they say is more accountable. They say there's too many layers in between the manager and the people. Who's not elected. He's hired by the select board. But this version keeps the select board, the 7 members, and just inserts a mayor who's elected, not a manager who's hired. And one of the big complaints about this is that you don't have a professional. You could have anybody come in there, and the opponents are saying you could get a beauty contest, you could get an incompetent mayor. And it actually says something about also managing the town, although Bethel stresses that after this would pass, you'd have 1 year before the first election, and during that time you refine this as to terms, length of terms, and also a controversial veto reference that he has in there. The mayor has the power to veto any act of or any decision of the select board, and it doesn't say anything about overrides. So a lot of people have jumped on that and said, well, this sounds like a dictatorship. That's a quote from one of the people. And So you have all that up in the air, and it have to be decided sort of like with a charter commission, I imagine. I don't know. I don't know if anyone has ever done this before in the same way.
So
Usually you have a charter commission, and in fact, Bennington had one last year.
Yes.
That came up with a lot of smaller revisions, nothing like this, and some to put more accountability on the board and on the manager, like our annual review, terms of no more than 3 years for the manager, and the select board absentee rule.
That was my favorite.
You couldn't stay away from meetings, or you could be removed. Things like that to get more accountability, but not to go to the more drastic measure of making this a mayor, and not even changing it to a city. Really, it just becomes a mayor. It's pretty interesting, and there's a lot on the line for Bennington's future, no matter which way you think about that.
And this is being driven by a sense that a mayor would be a better proponent for,
Sure.
bringing more jobs to Bennington or more
That's
business vitality.
Exactly, and also be the face of Bennington, that kind of thing. And it's based on a strong mayor, which is different than some of the more ceremonial mayors that some of the cities have. And this is sort of based on Rutland, which has a strong mayor. So they have more power to, I guess, negotiate harder with the either council or whatever you call it. Have more, like the veto he wants to put in there makes it really kind of strong. Although he's claiming that the board would still have to approve anything the mayor wanted. It couldn't be, he could reject them, but they could reject him. So it's kind of, he thinks it's a wash, this Mike Bethel. A lot of people say it's too many questions, and they're against it for that reason. Also, that it's too much power for one person, that kind of thing, and there's no requirements. Like with a manager, you have certain things you look for in a resume. How to manage a town, that kind of thing. So basically, you'd possibly have to hire your own manager to work with the mayor if it went that far.
Will make for an interesting evening down in Bennington, I'm sure.
Very interesting.
Meanwhile, traveling 25 miles or so up Route 7, Greg, in Manchester, we have, I think, the makings of a fairly interesting floor meeting on Saturday at MEMS. Strikes me that question around the Manchester Business Association's request for $50,000 as a match to their own fundraising to help them boost marketing Manchester probably be the number one subject there, you think?
I'm thinking that's agenda number 8 on your warning. That's going to be the star of the afternoon, I think. The budget only a slight increase. Nothing really super ambitious in the capital budget. There are a couple of matters later in the agenda with regards to the bike path, whether that would be decided by Australian ballot or floor vote, and also Manchester is one of the towns that has. On the warning, the non-binding question put forward by 350.org throughout Vermont. But yes, the MBA is the big one. And there's been this continuing debate since the Manchester in the Mountains Chamber of Commerce dissolved almost 2 years ago about how Manchester should promote itself and where the funding for that will come from. So you have a proposal for $50,000. It would be directly funded. Now, the interesting thing about this is there was almost a counter proposal that the select board rolled around for a while before deciding to move forward as is, where there would be a grant program in which the select board would form a committee that would review economic development grants that people put forward if they were nonprofits, if they had matching money. So they decided not to do that this year. There was a sense that it would obscure the issue and that this deserved to be voted on up or down by by voters at town meeting. So you have on one side folks who are at the MBA who are saying that this money is needed to continue their efforts to market the town, and to do some events that with the matching money, they would also be giving $20,000 to the Independent Television Festival, ITV Fest, which had its successful first run this past fall. And so they would be getting $20,000 to help them with expenses as they put on their festival for the next the next year. Now, the concerns are, there are concerns that have come up in past debates over the Manchester Marketing Initiative and whether tax money ought to be used to essentially to fund a not-for-profit organization. And there's some ideological opposition to that. There's a feeling that essentially you're asking the taxpayers to be part of the nonprofit organization, whether they like it or not. But at the same time, money for marketing the town doesn't fall out of the clear blue sky. And this group has done the work. They've been largely doing digital. They've been doing a lot of digital advertising, trying to promote Manchester, and so they've got data to back that up. And so it'll be interesting to see what kind of case they bring to the floor about why this should be supported, and it'll be interesting to hear the reasons why folks think that shouldn't be so. Mm-hmm. So that's going to be that'll be the fun one, I think.
Yeah.
The bike path is a little more procedural, but essentially we're not, Manchester Town Meeting voters won't be asked whether or not to approve or disapprove of a proposal for a bike path. It's about 1.2, how many miles is that?
Less than 2 miles.
It's a bike path essentially leading from the Richville Road area up in Dorset.
Right. I mean, I think the ultimate goal was to have it all the way from MEMS to the Dorset School.
Sure. And so this question asks whether or not, once Manchester decides if they want to purchase the bike path as an entity, whether it would be done by floor vote or by Australian ballot in the future.
So they won't be deciding the merits of the question.
Right.
So
it'll be interesting to see if the moderator, Michael Norwath, would be able to, he's got a challenge on his hands in order to being able to manage debate of the question on whether it's about the merits of the bike path versus concerns about the cost and about privacy and about right-of-way. When really this question is pretty narrowly specified about how are we going to vote for this.
Okay.
So there's that. There's also a very interesting proposal for a hydrant. Essentially, it's a water protection district, and this would be give the Board of Water Commissioners the ability to assess property, whether they're water users or not, as long as they're within 1,000 feet of a hydrant. The underlying argument on that is, folks that are getting fire protection from the town, from the water board, should also be paying a little something for that. And that would be based not on usage, but on the grand list value. And that would involve not-for-profits and folks who aren't taxed or aren't water customers in some cases. So there are fewer specifics on that. But it should be it's an interesting proposal, and I think that there'll be some good debate about it.
All right. Well, Jim, back down farther south in the other end of the county there, you had an interesting story about the town clerk situation in Pownell.
That is something
intriguing.
It seems as though some of the towns that have had either vacancies or incapacitated clerks, or up in Coventry, more like possible embezzlement, have wanted to appoint their clerks, have them appointed rather than elected, because there is quite a bit of independence there. And in Pownell, I'm not sure if it's the same in every town, but they have always been independent as far as handling the fees that come in. And you get a lot of fees for marriage licenses and deeds and transfers and things like that, dog fees. And a percentage of the money goes to the clerk, a percentage goes to the state, and part to the town. But the part that, in Pownell they had a problem because the clerk has been ill for a long time, including for the last year out of the office. But the town, the selectmen basically are saying that they could have moved in faster to do something, but it's an independent position. It's an office that's separate from the town, and they want to bring it under the town, and they put it on the ballot to make it an elective, and then they would pay the salary of the clerk, and all the fee money would go to them, and they would send to the state. See, the problem here was that the state's portion got behind. They had a certain percentage they're supposed to send all the time, and it got behind for quite a few years. And so they wanted to rectify that, and they did. They found all the money in the clerk's, within the clerk's money, but they couldn't really step in and do anything, they say, because there's a separation. It's an elected position, and if you go to clerk, they can say, well, no, that's my office, you can't do anything. And I'm not saying that she did that, but that's the way it's always been run. Other towns, Shasberry, they went to something where they have an elected clerk, but the money goes to the town and a salary is paid. So that's another option that's out there.
Because I thought most town clerks that I'm familiar with around Vermont, it's always been an elected position.
Well, it's
I've
elected.
never heard of one being appointed.
That's an option that came out of the Coventry thing. I think there was legislation. I'm pretty sure that was the first time that the option was offered.
All right.
And a treasurer can be appointed too.
Yes.
That's a case where she embezzled.
Up there, she had
a lot of money.
all three. I think the delinquent tax collector, I believe, too, and she hasn't been convicted, but the authorities claim that they're close to some kind of charge. Quite a bit of money was missing there. That's not the case in Pownell. They had overdue payments, and they eventually made an agreement with the clerk to put all the money, including what should have gone to her, into a fund to make sure they covered it. And they think they have, and they're going to have it under the audit for the town this year. The whole office will be under that for the first time. It had never been included in the annual audit, according to selectmen. But there's two people on the select board who disagree. I think it should be, and quite a few people on the local Front Porch Forum have been all in favor.
I'm sure there's been
saying that it's a takeover.
A lot of dialogue going on
saying
about
it's a takeover by the selectmen. So that's another kind of interesting to see how that turns out.
Yeah.
That reminds me of another Manchester issue, actually. Well, Manchester will also be asked whether it will appoint or elect the successor to David Fielding once he steps
the
down as
town
treasurer.
yeah.
I mean, Manchester had already gone in the direction of appointing an auditor instead of having elected listers. So that's also a consideration that's on the warning.
Well, Greg, another town meeting that both of us have on our radar, I know,
Indeed.
is the one in Windhall.
Yes.
That's the traditional town, old style format. Everything on the floor on Tuesday, and as many folks know, Windhall is facing a very difficult school tax situation, with more students coming in than they anticipated, and carrying over a deficit from a previous year, and looking at a really gargantuan tax increase. And tell us the story on that one. There, do you?
Well,
is there a way out?
That's the big question, and the way out is sort of the second part of the question that Windhall voters are going to face when they meet on Tuesday morning. Traditional town meeting format from the floor. It's going to be held in the gym at the Mountain School, and I don't think the gym at the Mountain School is going to be able to hold all the people who are going to want to be there, because Windhall is looking at, I believe, the school board came forward with an alternative to what would have been a 50-cent per $100 in valuation tax increase on the education side. They came up with, I believe it was 23 cents per 100.
Which is still
here we are on tape, which is still
breathtaking.
humongous. But that also means that would also mean that Windhall would stop paying the sending town rate to Burton Academy. And right now, Burton Academy is the only school. Windhall is 100% school choice, and so every student that moves in affects their budget. It just essentially affects the per pupil expenditure. There's no a public district would see this as an opportunity to have efficiency. And they would be able to actually use those extra students to drive down the cost. In this case, it only raises the cost, and the way that funding formula works has really penalized Windhall for going to 100% choice format. So the problem is that if they stop paying sending town rate to Burton, they're no longer a sending town, first of all. Second of all, that would leave them no other options in terms of being able to control costs in the future, unless they decided to join the Taconic and Green Public School District, the regional school district that was formed through Act 46. And that wouldn't be instantaneous. And this vote, again, is a procedural vote. There's a second question put forward that asks whether school choice issues would be voted in the future by Australian ballot rather than on the floor. I believe that's because of a state requirement. So the question is, would Wynn Hall, if Wynn Hall joined the Sukiennik and Green District, it would lose school choice for K through 8. Now, that's a big consideration because the growth that Wynn Hall has enjoyed over the past several years has been because they're a school choice district. That's driven house sales. But so in a way, they're sort of a victim of their own success because they expected that 10 more kids would be coming this year. 29 showed up, and you did a story about this for GNAT. I was able to sort of follow up and add on that a little bit. It's a tough question because you have voters facing the possibility of really substantial property tax increase, and not everybody in Wynn Hall is a parent of a student at Maple Street School or the Mountain School or Burton Academy. Some are on fixed incomes, and that kind of tax increase is really unfathomable.
Yeah,
but at the same time,
sell your house kind of situation.
But at the same time, it's driven real estate values northward in Wynn Hall because people have moved to town because of choice. So really, there are only difficult choices for voters in Wynn Hall. And the other interesting thing about this is that if voters who are Burton parents wanted to actually continue to pay the sending rate, that would have to be moved from the floor. They can only go up from what the school board has proposed from the floor. So things could get really passionate in Wynn Hall, and it's an unenviable position with no easy answers.
What would be the process for getting into the Sukiennik and Green?
Okay, so they would need to submit to the State Board of Education to explain what they were doing.
Right.
Then, in order for them to be accepted by the Sukiennik and Green would also have to go to the State Board. But in order for Wynn Hall to join the Sukiennik Green, every single one of those 9 towns, the TNG would have to vote yes.
Yeah.
So they would be they would be absorbing Wynn Hall's current tax burden as well. And one of Wynn Hall's issues in terms of being able to find an Act 46 partner is that there was the possibility of what's called the 3-by-1 with Stratton, and Sandgate, which are all non-operating, full 100% choice districts, would be joining alongside Arlington, which is the only K through 12 between here and Rutland. But those communities would have to, those 2 communities that also do choice, Sandgate and Stratton, would have to share in Wynn Hall's tax burden.
They weren't eager to do that.
And no one's lining up for that. And the really ironic thing about this, if Wynn Hall was a public school district and was enjoying that kind of growth, they would be getting gold stars from the state.
Sure.
The governor would be here, their legislators would be here, saying, look at what Wynn Hall is doing. They're doing exactly what it is we want to do across the rest of the state. Yeah. But as a choice district, those costs, the popularity only adds cost. And it's great for folks who want choice. But at the same time, it does come with a financial tag, a price tag. And it's also a significant hurdle that the Mountain School and Maple Street School might have to face in the future if Wynn Hall were to join the TNG, because a large percentage of those schools are Wynn Hall children.
Sure.
Oh.
Yeah.
Wow.
Interesting questions. Well, got a couple of minutes left. I just thought it might be kind of interesting to throw around the thought of what is the future of town meeting? I mean, this is a subject that's come up before. Several years ago, there were a few books written about, is town meeting really going to survive in the 21st century? The criticism being that at typical floor meeting, you get a small fraction of the town's electorate, maybe 5%, 10%, if we're doing well, show up for a floor meeting where all the issues are discussed and people get to hear the pros and cons of everything. And that's always been cited as one of the great things about the local grassroots democracy flavor. You get to hear all sides of a question. But when such a small number of the eligible voters show up because they're either some can't because they're working or they have childcare responsibilities or other responsibilities, is that really what might have been great in 1820? Is that still terrific in 2018 when so many things are different? I guess I just wondered, but what your thoughts are about that, and also the other thing that struck me is how few competitive races we have this year.
Right.
I mean, that's not a new thing either, but it just struck me this year in particular that, wow, I can't think of hardly, there's one competitive race for delinquent tax collector in Arlington, and that's about the only one I've run across.
Good job.
So what's going on here? I mean, do we think town meeting, as we've come to know and love it, really has a future?
As far
I'll
as
defer to the Vermont veteran first.
Well, as far as the floor meetings, I think that they're great as far as putting a debate out there, and people get to ask questions directly. It's really wonderful, but I think my problem with it is they should separate it by a few days or a week from the actual voting, and that would, maybe a week is the best way to do it. And that would give people time to digest that, to see it on social media and in the news, what was talked about, what was said at the meetings. And I think it would be on TV, and I think people would get more out of it, even if they didn't attend. But now, the way it is now, you go, bam, it's 7 o'clock at night, or usually, and the next morning you're voting. There's no time to really, unless you're at the meeting, which not many people are a lot of times. So,
Well, some people would point to the number of questions that have moved to the Australian ballot as part of the problem.
Right.
I'm not sure, because you do get more turnout when you have a full day to vote instead of having to be in that metal chair for how many hours it takes. But the thing is, the town meeting is so much a part of Vermont's identity. I mean, we just ran the Four Freedoms paintings on our front pages because we're at the 75th anniversary of those paintings, which were created in Arlington, Vermont. And one of those paintings is a fellow standing up at town meeting saying something that seems awfully unpopular with the folks who are surrounding him, but it's his opportunity to stand up and say, I think things should be this way. And there are examples in every town where maybe a voice changed because someone stood up and said, maybe that person's right. I think the example that Ed Morrow, the co-founder of the North Shire Bookstore, always uses is that Manchester was ready to turn down the McDonald's. I mean, McDonald's coming to Manchester was a big deal, but someone stood up and said, "Hey, when folks of limited means come to town, we should have an option for them, and that this is okay," and it changed people's minds. So it would. I think that town meeting used to be the social event of the season. It was, because after being shut in all winter, everyone got in their horse-drawn sleigh and went to the center of town for. I mean, maybe the social aspect of it would bring people back if more folks went back to the old school way of doing things and had a potluck or something. But it would be sad to lose that participatory democracy that is so much a part of Vermont's heritage.
I often find myself wondering if it may be that the traditional form of town meeting, as we sort of come to know it, still works okay in small towns, but in larger towns, like say Bennington, for instance, maybe even in Manchester, or places like Rutland or Burlington, large towns like that. I know Brattleboro has a separate format, a representative town meeting, which has always been kind of interesting. I've often wondered if that's really
I've covered that in Adams, Mass. has that.
Amherst, Mass. has that too.
Oh yeah, you have your delegates from your precinct, and they vote on things. That's interesting in a way. A lot of people, they're usually there. They're not always there either, the delegates, but that cuts it down the number of people you have to really have a turnout for, I think. It's not as direct, but still.
Yeah, I've often wondered, I mean, I've never gone to their representative town meeting, but do they have the sort of free flow of ideas and discussion?
Sometimes, and sometimes it's seems to be decided ahead of time, almost like a select board meeting sometimes. And,
I want to jump in here. Note that the Taconic Green is having its first annual town meeting on Tuesday. Yeah. And they're actually they're trying to promote participation by having buses bringing voters from Dorset and Manchester up to town meeting, to their annual meeting, which will be at Floodbrook School in Londonderry. So that'll be interesting to see. They're brand new. They want people to be there. So it'd be interesting to see how what kind of direct participation, what kind of audience they'll get.
Well, yeah, hopefully it'll be a good crowd, because it will be interesting to kind of see how that gets launched.
And you said refreshments too, right?
Yes,
there you
and
go.
light snacks will be served.
That's important.
As the press, we're always looking for the free food.
There we go.
Well, hopefully all of you who have the time and opportunity will get out and make your voice heard at your town meeting, whether it's Saturday in Manchester or a Monday night or a Tuesday, whenever it turns out to be. This is your chance to weigh in and have your voice be heard and your vote be counted. So I want to thank Jim Therrien and Greg Sukiennik again for being with us today
Thank you, Andrew.
to get us up to date on what's coming around the corner. And we'll see you all again next time. Have a great day.